I better be going.
I'll see you out. What will your testimony be at the inquest tomorrow?
The truth, I suppose.
Truth is relative. Even off the force, a fella can use a little help. Have you decided what line of work you'll be going into?
I only have the one trade.
What do you mean?
I'm a cop. A detective. I'm going private, that's all.
Who with? The Pinkertons? You got something lined up?
Just my own little agency.
I see. When were you planning on getting started?
Well, right away.
Oh, that's a shame. That really is.
How so?
Oh, the paperwork on these matters. A goddamn shame. Red tape. Sometimes an application for a license can be turned down for the most trivial of reasons. For no reason at all, actually.
So that's how it is.
I'll tell you how it is, Mr. Heller. Go out of the department under a cloud and you tie yourself up in a police scandal. Months go by, and you're not going to get your private detective's license till it's over, till maybe, not never.
Suppose I agree to corroborate Lang and Miller's story.
I'm good at cutting red tape.
How good?
You'll have your license tomorrow, good.
And when the trial comes up, suppose I pull a double cross. Suppose I tell a different story, like the real one.
I don't think you do that. You're not a stupid man. Licenses get revoked for no good reason sometimes. The mayor giveth, and the mayor taketh the fuck away.
Shit. God damn it. I'll do it.
Thought you might. Sergeant Miller, get yourself a good night's sleep, Mr. Heller. Nate, you have a busy day tomorrow. Sergeant Miller here will see you home.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the as-yet-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting from here in the Robservatory at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 995. Ooh, getting close. Getting close. As I said before, if you are interested in being on the 1000th episode of Robservations, it's a show all about being an imagination connoisseur, and I want to hear from you. Send me an email to rmburnett, RMBURNETT, 1701 at gmail.com, and put Robservations 1000 in the headlines and tell me, or in the subject heading, and tell me what you want to talk about. And I'll give you some time, and I'm going to schedule everybody. It's going to be a 16-hour show. I don't know how long we'll talk to people. It depends how many people I get in. The amount of time that people get to talk is directly a result of how many people want to talk. So we shall see. So I had an interesting, I go on Chris Gore's show, his Monday Film Thread show called Versus, which I actually quite enjoy. I think the discourse is pretty good, but we talk a lot about our favorite IPs. And on the show, I kind of got into it with Angry Badger, who is a dyed-in-the-wool Star Wars fan, as many people who I know are, as am I. And I was espousing my opinion that most of our Star Wars filmed entertainment is not as good as we want it to be. And I think that that's true. You could say that's true of a lot of franchises, IPs. But when I was growing up and I started watching Star Trek, of the original series, there's definitely a few clunkers, but most of the original series, of the 79 original series episodes, 80 if you want to include The Cage, but The Cage is not canonical as much as people want it to be. It's only canonical in the context of the Menagerie Part 1 and 2. But I would say about 75 to 80% of classic Star Trek episodes are good to great. And of the Twilight Zone, a large percentage are also good to great. You can watch Twilight Zone episodes that, if they're just good, they're still just good. You don't feel that they're not so good. But we got into it, and I've been thinking about this conversation ever since then. And I was thinking about the fact that, so you have to look at everything contextually. Nobody looks at anything contextually anymore. Now, let me preface this by saying, if you like something, like it. Don't let anybody tell you you shouldn't like what you like. I like a lot of things that are demonstrably not good, but I like them for whatever reasons. But I recognize that they aren't good. And I can tell you why I like them in relation to the fact that they're not good. And there are things that aren't, like, for instance, look, do I think that Fritz Kirsch, who directed Children of the Corn, the original, do I think that his 1985 teen gang angst movie Tough Turf that stars Kim Richards, Olivia Barish, Robert Downey Jr., and James Spader, do I think that's a really good movie? No. I love it, though. I love a lot of things about it. I love James Spader in it. I love Kim Richards in it. I love Jack Mack and the Heart Attack in it. I like young punk Robert Downey Jr. in it. I like Olivia Barish, who we'd seen in Repo Man, in it. But the movie is this weird amalgamation of like some 50s gang movie and some L.A. I don't know what L.A. it's supposed to take place in. The movie's not good, but I enjoy it. I like the plot. I like the characters. Everything. But I would never tell somebody that it's a great movie. I would just tell people that I really like it. I don't think Night of the Comet is a particularly great movie, but I do love it. I really love Night of the Comet, but I wouldn't stand on ceremony and say it's the greatest movie in the world. I enjoy it. And I can make that differentiation because I have critical thinking skills and critical acumen, because I know the difference between what's good and what's bad. And I think, look, I have talked about the objectivity of art. And I think one of the things that struck me when I went to USC was there was a lot of classic movies that I had never seen before. I've talked about, even though I owned Singing in the Rain on Laserdisc, I'd never watched Singing in the Rain. I didn't see it until I saw it on the big screen at USC the first day I was there. And Cinema 190 and Drew Casper's class. And I loved it. And it was very apparent to me why Singing in the Rain was considered a classic. Another movie I saw there, and I've talked about this before, was the 1950s Best Picture winner, All About Eve. That movie blew me away. I still think there's an argument to be made. It has one of the greatest screenplays ever written. But I know that. I know the difference between what's good and what's bad, and especially in regards to cinema history. When it comes to Star Wars, though, Star Wars, I think, had something that happened to it that is quite interesting. And what happened to Star Wars is that its fictional universe and our love of that fictional universe has overshadowed whether or not the quality of these movies is any good. Star Wars is impervious as an IP. It's impervious to, not in terms of box office, but in terms of how people love Star Wars. You can never get people to not love Star Wars. It would be very hard, because Star Wars has had many, many, many things that are disappointing about it, and yet we still love. We still love. And I found that, like, for instance, James Bond. There are not a lot of great James Bond movies. I'm going to be honest. As a James Bond lover, and I love the franchise. Love the franchise. But there are a lot of James Bond movies that are demonstrably not good. Now, do I like the Bond franchise? Will I watch A View to a Kill, which I can't stand? Sure. I'll watch it and take some pleasure from it. And there's always going to be somebody that comes along and go, I love View to a Kill is my favorite Bond movie. Well, one, no, it shouldn't be. And I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't like something that you like, but it's demonstrably not good. Because we have other Bond movies, such as From Russia with Love, I would say, as far as early Bonds go, probably the closest to Fleming's original novel. I love Goldfinger. I love Thunderball, but it's Thunderball's, while they thought an undersea battle might have been a great idea, it's a little lethargic, to be honest. But, even people who love Live and Let Die, it's not good. Man with Golden Gun, Diamonds Are Forever. Tough to sit through. Now, I love Spy Who Loved Me, and I love Moonraker. Are those good movies? Moonraker is a remake of Spy Who Loved Me, which is a remake of You Only Live Twice. So you go, Christopher Wood. He wrote both of those movies. But I like them. Now, I actually think Spy Who Loved Me is probably the best Roger Moore Bond because it's epic and all that. But the thing is, my love of the Bond franchise is not, it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't matter that I had 5 Daniel Craig movies and I think only one of them is particularly good. And it isn't Skyfall. Now we can argue that all you want. It's fine. But in terms of what a Bond movie is supposed to do and what Bond as an IP is supposed to do. So anyway, I was having this argument with Angry Badger and I realized I'm old. So when I was 10 years old, when Star Wars came out in 1977, I saw it opening weekend. And the thing about, now it's funny because Angry Badger was throwing at me the idea, even though he's a big Star Wars lover, that, the dialogue in Star Wars isn't good or the acting isn't good or whatever. And I'm like, that's simply not true. Because Harrison Ford goes on a talk show, and we've all seen a clip where he said a million times, George, you can write this, but you can't say it. Well, that's kind of a funny retcon. Sure, there's a lot of crazy dialogue, but if you look at Star Wars, there isn't a lot of things that come out of Han Solo's mouth that aren't fucking badass. So when you go back and you watch Star Wars, and by the way, it was that way when I saw it opening weekend in 1977. Han Solo was one of the coolest characters anybody had ever seen. That's because droids don't pull people that's because droids don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. Wookiees have been known to do that. I suggest a new strategy, R2. Let the Wookiee win. Okay, those were classic scenes today, and they were classic scenes almost, 37 years or 47 years ago. Star Wars is a really good movie. It's a good movie across the board. And I would dare say it's probably, if not one of the greatest fantasy movies ever made, maybe the greatest fantasy movie ever made, because it did things we had never seen before. Obviously, the lived-in universe that quote-unquote used future or used past in Star Wars' case, the verisimilitude of the universe, nothing like that had ever been created. And a lot of that was alchemy. It was truly movie magic because George Lucas thought he was doing one thing, but he really was way in over his head. And he had a lot of collaborators. He had people like he didn't dream up the universe. He had people like Ralph McQuarrie dreaming up the universe. He had all the people at ILM. I don't mean to denigrate George Lucas's vision, but George Lucas, we have evidence to support this as well, and I'll get to that. When George Lucas was in over his head, and Star Wars, as most movies are a collective effort. Department heads who are when you're tasked with creating, John Marlowe, the costume designer and all that, when you're tasked with creating things that never existed before, you're reliant upon, you're not the director's, even the writer, he's a writer-director, is not coming up with this stuff. He's written it down. What does it look like? So the greatness of Star Wars, whether George Lucas thought he was making a kid's movie to start out with, it was adults making that film. And they weren't making that film for kids. Star Wars was a movie that was made for everybody, or perhaps the inner child in all of us. There was not any one time in Star Wars that anybody on that movie, maybe with the exception of George Lucas, certainly Gary Kurtz, was ever thinking, we are making this space fantasy for children. If you read the making of books and everything, it doesn't bear that out. They were not, what George says, oh, we're making these are made for kids. They were not trying to make this for kids. George Lucas did not sell 20th Century Fox on doing a space epic for children. He wanted to make a space epic that appealed to everybody. As all action adventures, swashbuckling, sci-fi, fantasy thrillers are. And I know this because when I was a kid, there were movies that were made for kids. They were Disney live-action films like Herbie the Love Bug, Herbie Goes Bananas, Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo, Herbie Rides Again. I saw them all. Treasure of Matacumbe. Even Island at the Top of the World, which is probably in tone the most adult Disney movie. I mean, these were made for kids. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea would be more akin to what Star Wars was made for. Families. Everybody. Mary Poppins certainly had a kid bent to it, but it was just as delightful for adults. But to me, Star Wars was kind of the equivalent of what 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was at the time it was made. But it was certainly made for everyone. And the reason that it succeeded is because you had all of these different sensibilities trying to make this crazy science fiction fantasy epic, space fantasy work. And you had Academy Award caliber people like Marcia Lucas and Richard Chew and Paul Hirsch editing the film. You had John Williams, who was going to do, I heard the other day, A Bridge Too Far and had to be begged to do Star Wars. And when Star Wars was made, obviously George had all these ideas running through his head. Journal of the Wills, I've heard it all. I've read it all. I don't need to have people write in the comments. Trust me, I've been a Star Wars fan since that weekend in 1977. I had every action figure. I had the sketchbook and I had the portfolio and the blueprints. I had every single Star Wars thing ever. My Star Wars collection, I sold a lot of stuff, but I still have very expensive die-cast Darth Vader's TIE Fighters right there. Very expensive die-cast Slave One is right there. I'm building a 4-foot Millennium Falcon model. All of these things. I don't have to. I have Hot Toys figures. I have a 6-scale snowspeeder right over there. I don't have to explain my Star Wars bona fides to everybody. I really don't. Because I've been a fanatical Star Wars fan. As everyone knows, I saw Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater. So the thing is, when Star Wars came out, it was one of the best, if not the best, fantasy film ever made. Ever made. And I would stand it up, as a matter of fact, in 1977, there were other great science fiction movies. I would not put Star Wars and 2001 next to each other because they're very different movies. They're trying to do very different things. They're both set in space. But I would say that at the time, the closest thing, I would say that the original Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, for its time, and 20 years later, Star Wars, not exactly 20 years later, for its time, were kind of the equivalent of changing what fantasy films could be. The same way that when King Kong came out, in the early 30s, probably did the same kind of thing to audiences, but in terms of the vision of it. But Star Wars, for me, because it was a space fantasy. So it was amazing. It was amazing, and everybody who worked on that film deserves all the respect in the world because they were creating magic. They were conjuring up. They created, the Dijkstraflex camera and motion control, miniature photography, all that stuff, all the design work, the artwork. I mean, come on. The design of the Millennium Falcon itself, who would have, that was so out there. TIE Fighters. Ben Burtt's sound design. There was so much going on in Star Wars with all these creative people doing things, and it was cut together uncompromisingly at the top. All these people were working at the top of their game, and the rest is history. Now, They weren't thinking at the time. You can say that, okay, George was shrewd in retaining merchandising rights because 20th Century Fox is like, why would you want merchandising rights? What? No one had ever seen anything happen with merchandising rights, so of course take them. Well, that was a mistake because Star Wars, once it became a phenomenon, but nobody would have known it at the time because it hadn't happened yet. So Star Wars becomes a phenomenon. And remember, I mean, George Lucas knew that if Star Wars wasn't no one conceived of Star Wars becoming the box office bonanza that it became. Nobody. And that's why, George Lucas had Alan Dean Foster write Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was the first tie-in, but they were thinking about making that a movie, and it was a smaller scale story, but it involved Luke and Leia. And by the way, in that book, Luke and Leia were not brother and sister. And that was another thing. Luke and Leia were never brother and sister at this time. And if you think about it, it makes sense because the fact that, first of all, the fact that Luke and Leia are brother and sisters, I'm going to say this, the dumbest shit in the world. It should never have happened. I understand why it happened, but even if you listen to what Gary Kurtz talks about how the original idea of Return of the Jedi was going to happen, which was called Revenge of the Jedi, Leia was never supposed to be Luke's sister. That came later. Whatever retcon you want to read, it's not evidenced. There's no evidence in it in Star Wars. It's not alluded to because they hadn't figured that out yet. They hadn't decided to do it, which, by the way, it was a monstrous mistake to make Leia Luke's sister. And I'm going to read an article a little later that proves it. Well, in a way, it was an Arthurian. It was Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. That's what was going on. Luke was Arthur, Leia was Guinevere, and Han Solo was Lancelot. That's Arthurian mythos. I mean, it was all right there. And they kind of kept that going. Okay, 3 years later, we got Empire Strikes Back. George Lucas, he didn't direct it. He didn't write it. It was Lee Brackett and then Lawrence Kasdan. And then Lucas found his old film school professor, Irvin Kershner, a great director in his own right, to direct the film. And Irvin Kershner certainly didn't think he was making a kid's movie. Neither did the screenplay say that they were making a kid's movie. Empire Strikes Back extended the Star Wars mythos, delved into that mysticism of the Jedi with Yoda, created Yoda, and offered, as I was growing older, I was now 13 when Empire came out, I was bar mitzvahed. I was a bar mitzvah boy that year. I'd learned Hebrew. I had a lot of strict religious, well, not strict, but I had staunch religious education growing up for years, led up to my bar mitzvah, and Empire Strikes Back came out the same week as my bar mitzvah. It was a hugely influential movie on me that I saw 26 times in the theater. You've heard me say that a million times, but it's true. But the thing about Empire Strikes Back was it was Star Wars growing up. The themes in Star Wars, the peril in Empire, all of those things were being supported. And the people working on Empire Strikes Back certainly didn't think they were making a kid's movie. They were making a movie for the world. They were making a new modern fantasy myth that had something to say to everyone, not just kids, although kids loved it. And the universe that was being created through those two movies and extrapolated on, or upon, was astonishing. And when Empire Strikes Back came out, look, I remember being nervous as hell as a kid. How could possibly, Star Wars... I'd seen Star Wars before I owned the videotape myself. My friend Jimmy Fiddler had a bootleg videotape of Star Wars. We used to go to his house after school all the time and elementary school and watch it. His dad was rich and somehow figured out he was the first kid I knew who had a VCR, and they had a bootleg copy of Star Wars, which you could barely see and make out, but we watched it every day because we could hear it, and collecting everything and all of that. And so when Empire came out and fulfilled a promise that Star Wars had made, that if they were going to make a second movie, because remember, sequels, a lot of sequels weren't good. You had Godfather 2, that was about it. Empire could have been Exorcist 2, The Heretic. It could have been. It wasn't, but it could have been. I like Rocky 2. But sequels, I even like Jaws 2. Jaws 2 is it's a teen film about cruising, but instead of cars, you have catamarans. But the thing is, Empire was also a great film. And you know what? I don't care what anyone says. When Yoda looks up in the sky and says, no, there is another, it was not Princess fucking Leia. It wasn't. And there was, again, no insinuation, but what you were seeing was, you were seeing the Arthurian myth continue to play out. The love that was growing between Leia and Han. But Luke had his own problems. You know, Luke had, his destiny was to become a Jedi and confront his father. Now, do I think Vader was Luke's father when they were making Star Wars? No, I don't. Again, there's no indication of that, and there's no reason to think that. You know, all of it was all a retcon. Star Wars was the biggest retcon sham that's been placed on all of fandom. But whatever. I can just tell you, having lived through it myself and having been a gigantic Star Wars fan and read every magazine article, and I read everything, and we were all Star Wars fanatics, but I was particularly a Star Wars fanatic. That's why Return of the Jedi, you know, comes back in. You know, George almost lost the merchandising rights when they were making Empire. You should read Rinsler's books, his coffee table books on the making of Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. Get those books. They're essential reading. If you haven't read those books and you're a Star Wars fan, what's wrong with you? You can't even talk about Star Wars as a cultural phenomenon unless you read those books, honestly. And The Secret History of Star Wars, all those things. But so you get to Return of the Jedi, and it was interesting to me because, and I've said this before, Return of the Jedi was wrong in the opening scene. When you have the Imperial shuttle officers talking that are bringing Vader's shuttle, Vader's shuttle's landing at the Death Star 2. They were wrong. They weren't right. They didn't have the right kind of guys. They didn't have the right kind of voices. They didn't even look right. It seems weird to say. And also, the Death Star 2. They blew up a Death Star. So as a kid, I mean, I knew it was coming. I knew that but even I thought as a 16-year-old, I'm like, why would you make another Death Star when the first Death Star was blown up? And this Death Star's not even finished. A cool visual. But for me, even before the movie opened, I was like, that's dumb. I thought, and the speculation in all the fan magazines and the things that came out, that Star Wars was going to give us the Return of the King of the Star Wars universe. We were going to go to Coruscant. We were going to go to the seat of Imperial power. The rebels would assault. It would be a planetary assault against, it would be an apocalyptic battle for the ages. You know, the Coruscant was going to be Minas Tirith. Instead of the White City, you've got the Planet City. And there was, and another thing I was talking about, and it's hard for people to grasp this who weren't there, and even if you were there, if you weren't a fan, if you weren't aware of fantasy literature, Lord of the Rings loomed large in the 70s. It was really popularized in the 60s, and then it kept on. Dungeons and Dragons, what was that, 75? When did Gary Gygax come out with that? Mid-70s, all of that was Tolkien. It was all because people were reading I read Lord of the Rings in elementary school. You know, we were all reading that stuff. And there was an insinuation, because we knew at the end of Empire that Star Wars was a trilogy. And I'm sorry, but so was Lord of the Rings. And Star Wars was very much like that. And people were expecting Return of the King. I was. Now, rightly or wrongly, you can say that, oh, Rob, no, I'm telling you. Fandom talked this way. I know, because I was there. I was traipsing around Seattle's fan community. We had little fan events and we had conventions, and I went to them. You know, we had the PSST, the Puget Sound Star Trekkers, and they would put on events, and you'd go there, and invariably, it was very funny because the fan community, Star Wars wasn't considered serious. Even Harlan Ellison made fun of Star Wars, and everyone's like, Star Wars isn't serious, it's space fantasy. And there were people in because most science fiction communities were very literary based, because there just wasn't a lot of great science fiction media at the time. So there was definitely in the hardcore, I mean, look, come on, secretly everybody loves Star Wars, but in the hardcore fan communities, they saw it ripping off Dune, they saw it just not being serious enough, and I get it. That's fine. You're all dead inside. But it was there was a thought that we were going to get something epic. How could we not? Next time you watch Star Wars, or next time you watch Return of the Jedi, and look, there's a lot of people that saw Return of the Jedi that are in the fan communities now that think that Return of the Jedi is their favorite movie. And I say they think, and indeed it probably is your favorite Star Wars movie. But here's the thing. It's not a good movie. I'll say it again. Return of the Jedi is not a good movie. Now, am I criticizing you when I say that? No. But I'll tell you something. My friend Steve Melching, we used to go to his house on New Year's Day, and for a number of years, we would watch Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. Now, keep in mind these were the original, the special editions hadn't come out yet. When you do that in a row, when you get to Return of the Jedi, everything about Return of the Jedi is a huge come down, especially when you watch Star Wars and Empire. Special editions, not so much, because the CGI and the imagery in Star Wars, especially Star Wars, seeing Jabba the Hutt, seeing Boba Fett, they did a lot of things that diminished Star Wars as a film by adding all that crap that shouldn't. Mos Eisley is a travesty. It's just, because Mos Eisley is not it was a wretched hive of scum and villainy, not some sprawling metropolis spaceport. It was like an East Texas shithole truck stop. But now with the special editions, they've changed all that. I mean, it might be a subtle change, but it ripples. It has a ripple effect. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. When you watch the cinematography, when R2 and 3PO go up to Jabba's palace door, the lighting, you're like, well, that's not very convincing. We have a shot where they're outside the desert, and then we're on a soundstage. What is this, a TV show? Return of the Jedi is really lit like a television show. The lighting is terrible. You go from Peter Shuzitsky, who shot Empire, to Return of the Jedi. Not good. When you see R2 and 3PO face down in the sand, having to get picked up in front of a very unconvincing backdrop, they get picked up. I mean, it's and even the entire visual effects sequences of Jabba's sail barge, all of that, not good. As a matter of fact, there's some the visual effects. I know the sheer volume of visual effects was important. They had a lot to do, but Jedi has some really, really, really terrible visual effect shots. They got some great effect shots, but there's a lot of really terrible visual effect shots in that movie too. And it's funny because when Jedi first played, I think they've now fixed it. There was a guy walking across Jabba's sail barge that strobed. And to be fair, if you know something about your Return of the Jedi history, they did have a problem with the negative, the actual negative that was shot. There was a problem with the bath it was developed in or something. And so there's a lot of problematic, the blob around, they had to cover up the light in the Emperor's suit with this blob that was very apparent. And anyway, I don't want to bag on Return of the Jedi, but I will say this. Return of the Jedi was a movie. It was the first movie in the Star Wars franchise that was made specifically to sell toys, to be a merchandising engine. That's why you could get a figure of Weequay or a Man-a-Man, you name it. Hey, let's have Jabba's court there, and the design work of Jedi. George Lucas had a lot more control, Cy Snoodles. The Rebo Band. Hey, who doesn't love Max Rebo? But they're not like Phil Gurdan and the Modal Nodes. Let me tell you. I mean, the swing band in Mos Eisley, there was a Star Wars alien band for you. Fraggle Rock is where Max Rebo and his band's from. And that was a problem. And that was George Lucas, his sensibilities were coming in. And those are the things, and I don't mean to slag off on George, but there is a huge, the whole reason for Return of the Jedi being the way Return of the Jedi was very different than the reason Star Wars and Empire were made. And that has been the problem with Star Wars ever since. Star Wars was an amazing, come out of nowhere, gigantic success. Empire Strikes Back was made by filmmakers that were trying to make, remember, different filmmakers, Sure, George Lucas was producing it, but he wasn't even in Norway when they shot the movie, when the whole Hoth sequence. And Gary Kurtz was really the driving force when it came to Empire. And Gary Kurtz, undeniably, his influence was on both of those films. The reason, obviously, they left Empire on a cliffhanger, but the methodology and the reasons for what they did on Jedi were not the same reasons that Star Wars and Empire were made. It was now Star Wars had become a business, a very big business. And that's the real problem with what happened. That's why my contention is that there are two Star Wars movies, Star Wars and Empire. And I was talking to my friend Steven last night, another director who's worked with Warwick Davis on one of the Leprechaun films. He said to me, he goes, you're right. I watched you on Chris Gore. Star Wars and Empire are the two real movies, and everything else is white noise. Everything else is white noise. All of it. Because the reasons for making it are different. It now became a business. It became the IP. And after Jedi, look what happened in the wake of and then also in George Lucas's mind, what really happened was that solidified the idea that, oh, come on, these aren't serious movies. I think when he saw the reaction of Star Wars and then how, Empire was taken so seriously, he's like, look, these movies are for kids. And he's spoken out about, like, he wanted you to see these movies when you're 10 or 11 and 12, and they would lead you down a proper path to becoming a good citizen, to becoming a moral person, and I get that. I understand. And Return of the Jedi it shows us that, yes, Star Wars, the Star Wars of Star Wars and the Star Wars of Empire Strikes Back are gone. They're gone. And that, I think, is one of the great, for me, the single greatest cinematic disappointment I've ever experienced was seeing Return of the Jedi in the theater. Because it was apparent to me in the first 20 minutes of that movie that the driving forces that made Star Wars and Empire were gone. And I'm not talking about the studio. I'm talking about the spiritual and artistic reasons why people make art. Now, you could say that, hey, Empire was a cash grab or whatever. No. It wasn't. You had great people. The fact that Lucas hired Irving Kershner, he wanted to elevate that material. He knew that he wasn't the right guy to make another. He was like, wow, I barely got through Star Wars through the skin of my teeth, and now it's a huge success. I need to hire somebody who can handle this, who can make a movie at this level, because I can't. Which is why he didn't. And then he had, and the reason that he came back to Jedi, yes, I know Richard Marquand directed it, was because Empire Strikes Back went almost twice, doubled its budget. 20th Century Fox, when they almost did not make payroll, and 20th Century Fox said, "I'll tell you what, we'll get in there and we'll give you all the money you need to finish Empire, but we want the merchandising rights for Star Wars back." Lucas, that was driving his company now, almost lost those things. And it was when Gary Kurtz was able to make a deal with, I believe, the Bank of Boston to finance to make sure Empire's payroll was paid, and they dodged a bullet. But that was the end of Lucas's relationship with Gary Kurtz. There was no way. So he came in on Jedi, and there was a lot more influence. Return of the Jedi is, I think, the purest expression of what George Lucas thought Star Wars was, and he had much more control. He exerted control over it, as opposed to the miracle of Star Wars, and then the people on Empire, all the fans of Star Wars that were now working on Empire, the people that worked on Star Wars that come on to Empire, and they were aspiring to do more. This is all just a theory, and it's all conjecture. And I know a lot of people hate me for saying this, but it's true. I mean, it's true. Demonstrably true. And you could sit there, you could teach a whole college course on this, but here's what also happened. The universe of Star Wars was so compelling. It was so amazing. It was to me too. I mean, I remember when I saw the design of the Slave One, I'm like, that looks like an iron to iron your clothes, but it's badass. because the cockpit seat, depending on where it's going to go and where it was, even the crazy designs of the ships, it was awesome. I mean, and what did you get in Empire? You got AT-ATs, ATSTs. You got twin pod cloud cars. You got the Superstar Destroyer. You got all these things. You got an Imperial probe droid. You got all this cool shit that you had never, ever seen before. And then at the end, the gathered Rebel fleet, what are all those ships? I mean, what did Jedi give us? A Tidarium shuttle? It's cool, I guess. It was cool. Although it didn't look very Star Warsian. Kind of did, I guess. But it was cool, Brought the Emperor to the Death Star. But, so to me, when I sat in that theater, I mean, Ewoks, it's not just that the Ewoks were, like, I like the idea of talking about a primitive force being able to fight back against a military that is very technologically advanced. There's no way they should have won that war, and it was talking about what happened in Vietnam. I like that, but the problem was the design of the Ewoks. It's not that just, I hated the Ewoks. It's that the Ewoks themselves, the design and execution of the Ewoks, completely undermined everything in Star Wars and Empire. The tone. It's the tone that I'm talking about here. Any pretense of a movie being made for adults was removed. The Tarzan yell, the booby traps the Ewoks set for these technologically advanced, none of that could happen. It was all the verisimilitude was out the window. And also, when you're watching Jedi, there's all this stuff that really doesn't matter. I mean, the speeder bike chase, sure, it's cool. But how is that advancing the plot? It's literally a side story just to show you an exciting. And Return of the Jedi is a movie that has a beginning and an end, but no middle. There's no middle. It's just stuff happening and exposition, and it's not driving any kind of a plot. There's no plot elements happening in the middle of that movie. And you find out that, of course, Leia is the other hope, the new hope, the new hope. And then we move on. And I'm going to say something that I hope this is taken in the right way, because I was saying this last night. Star Wars and Empire, they like to fuck. Those movies fuck you. They fuck your imagination. They fuck your emotions. They fuck your heart. And they do it with gusto. Those movies fuck. The only thing that fucks in Return of the Jedi is the Emperor's throne room scene. And there's premature ejaculation there. It's a great scene, but that's the only scene in a movie that should have fucked you hard the whole time. That movie, if ever you got just railed by a movie, Return of the Jedi should have. The same way Return of the King fucks, man. Return of the King fucks hard. Jedi doesn't. Jedi was for prepubescents who hadn't hit puberty yet. Jedi is a movie that's made for people that don't want to kiss a girl yet. Empire Strikes Back was taking you. I saw it when I was 13. And you know what? When Han kisses Leia, so. I'm like, I knew what that felt like. I've just replaced the negative power coupling. Come on, man. Star Wars and Empire fuck, Jedi doesn't fuck. What you want is fantasy films that fuck, that want to fuck, that like to fuck. I know it seems silly to say that, but you know what? You understand what I'm saying. George Lucas, not one of the great romantics. And, epic fantasy needs passion. It needs fire. And and by the way, everybody that made Star Wars and Empire liked to fuck too. Coming out of the 60s. You can see it in there. The design work is passionate. I mean, come on. Look at Leia's dress on Bespin, man. And you knew what went on that I knew. I was 13. I'm like, Han and Leia consummated that relationship. They could finally take a shower after how long it took them to get from the asteroid field to Bespin. But anyway, and that's also been a problem with the entire rest of the Star Wars franchise. the Star Wars franchise is surprisingly weird and chaste. It's like kind of like high school students today. I'm just kidding. That's not true. I don't know why I said that. They don't have to do anything because they can just go watch pornography on the internet. So they don't have to. Who dares wins. They don't get to do that. But so that's the problem. And after Return of the Jedi, all of the adult-minded stuff. Now here's the thing. The universe, though, Return of the Jedi did expand the Star Wars universe. It gave you got to see the Emperor, who instead of being, here's another thing that happened that people forget. So when we met the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, it wasn't when we met the Emperor in Empire Strikes Back, when they had to pull the Executor up out of the asteroid field so they could have a better connection with the Emperor, Clive Revill, it was a makeup, but who did the voice of the Emperor, was scary because he was quiet. Yes, if he could be turned, he could be a valuable asset. It was great. He was really scary. And then in the beginning, when you first meet the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, when you have the big procession of spaceships and TIE fighters, and you see all the stormtroopers and everybody lined up, what is the Emperor? It's the fucking witch from Snow White. Who was scared of that guy? Now, Ian McDiarmid was fun, but he wasn't in Star Wars and Empire. I don't know what movie he was in. He was in a kid's movie. He was Ian McDiarmid's performance of the Emperor. And by the way, I've come to love Ian McDiarmid because he was great in the prequel trilogy. But when you see the Emperor, when they changed, this is another thing. When they changed the Emperor, I'm like, what? They made the Emperor this he was a cartoon character. He was a Disney animated witch instead of being, and now because of the special editions, Clive Revill's Emperor is nowhere to be found. Unless you want to, I can make you a copy of the original. No, I can't do that. I'm spending the rest of my days doing that if I did that. But you can find it out there. Team Negative, Despecialized, Harmy, whatever. You can find the original if you want to. I'm sure you all have it anyway. But the original version of Empire's Emperor. Now it's Palpatine. It's Ian McDiarmid's Palpatine instead of Clive Revill's voice as the Emperor. That changed things too. And what it did was it made the threat of the Emperor in Star Wars in Empire, because that's when we met him, but it diminished him, I think, as a character. This is no shade on Ian McDiarmid, who's doing a great job, but that was the conception of the Emperor, like everything else in Return of the Jedi, made for kids. Made for kids. That entire movie, made for kids. There's all this humor. I mean, you literally have a robot, you have a torture droid torturing other droids. I mean, it's kind of like giving battle droids binoculars in The Phantom Menace. Why do they even need to see it all? They have sensors, don't they? That's neither here nor there. But it was Star Wars. After Star Wars and Empire were for adults, Return of the Jedi was for kids. And the franchise never recovered. Then we had the Droids TV show and Ewoks, and then the Caravan of Courage and the Ewok Adventure and all that. And that's why in the later 80s, Star Wars went away. Star Wars went away because it was on, at least for me, as somebody who was 10, 13, and 16, Star Wars for me hit me at a time when it was evolving and growing the same way that I was. And I would like to say this. I want to point something else out. If I might bring up Star Trek. The same thing happened with Star Trek, is that it grew and evolved as I was growing and evolving. My beloved original series that I started watching when I was 5. I mean, literally, the animated series was there. It came after, but it was, for kids, whatever. But when you get up to Star Trek the Motion Picture in 79, 2 years after Star Wars, Star Trek was getting more and more adult. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan was about mortality and morality. And Star Trek III, the sacrifices you can only make when you're already an adult. Same with Star Trek IV. And then Star Trek VI, so you're going from in 66 to 91 when Star Trek VI came out. I'm not talking about Next Gen yet, but the entire original series crew, 66 to 91. Pretty good run. I mean, that's a long way to go with fictional characters who always were on an upward trajectory. They were aging. They were incorporating the concerns of growing older into what was happening. Star Wars could have done that. And if Star Wars did give us a Return of the King instead of the Return of the Jedi, it might have become a much more resonant franchise to the population. But it quickly petered out because the people that loved Star Wars when they were, like me, 10, after Return of the Jedi, there was nothing left for me. As I was moving older, as I was getting older in my own life, Star Wars had left me behind. It didn't with Empire. Saw Star Wars change my life when I was 10. Made me want to go to make movies, seeing how it was made, the making of Star Wars, And then you get to Empire, and the story resonates more. And then I'm getting older. It was not the thing that Return of the Jedi taught me. One, cinematic disappointment, and two, it made me realize, this IP that I had been loving for 6 years. Now it's 77, it's now 83. When I'm going through a crucial point in my life growing up, literally the week after I got my driver's license was when Jedi came out. It let me down. It told me that, wow, I'm 16 and Star Wars has no more place in my life. It's not for me. It's for kids. It served up this disappointing swill of childish bullshit that was so cool in Star Wars and Empire, and then I get, Han Solo going, hey, it's me. And I'm supposed to go, yeah, cool. I mean, I love you, I know. I mean, the callbacks and the sand and all the creatures and the torture droids and all, it was just dumb. It was dumb. Now, I understand that this is going to be a controversial opinion or people are going to reject it outright. But if you search your feelings and consider what I'm saying, and you have to consider when things... I lived in a world where there was no Star Wars. Didn't exist. And so, as a science fiction, fantasy, horror freak, already, I mean, I was so ensconced in flights of fantasy, reading novels, watching movies. This is pre-home video, and it was all you had to read to find out stuff about this. So scouring magazines and reading all the books that came out and all that. It was a life-changing event. Now, it was also, I think, ground zero of modern fandom. In the 70s, Star Wars, to a certain extent, D&D, call it what you want. But by the mid-'80s, well, the early, I guess 83 was still the early 80s, but things were changing. And when Return of the Jedi went off the cliff and was made for kids, comic books went through an insane renaissance, and they were following their audience into adulthood. The superhero comic was evolving. Whether we started to get all the indie press stuff, I was reading American Flag. Comic books were giving me what I had hoped were giving me adult content. And I don't mean sex, although there was that too. I'm talking about concepts and storylines and characters that were suddenly moving forward in terms of their maturity, their complexity, whether it was, Frank Miller was writing Daredevil, but then he went and did Ronin. And like I said, Howard Chaykin with American Flag. And then by the time you get to the mid 80s, it was incredible. the comic stuff that we were getting, everything from Alan Moore taking over Swamp Thing, Sims Cerebus, everything that was coming out. So the comic art form was, and then I was going to college. You know, I was graduating from high school in 85, and then I was going to college. And comic books were growing, changing, evolving. Star Wars had not. And that was the thing. The people that I think were growing up with Star Wars, everybody still liked Star Wars. Everyone still liked the universe, but it ended. It ended, and it didn't end on a high note. Star Wars kind of went, I would say, in a way, I mean, anyway, it was over. It was over. And so the 80s passed by, and Star Wars really fell out of favor. Why did it fall out of favor? Because Return of the Jedi had no staying power. It did not resonate with audiences the way Star Wars and Empire did. Hey, everyone liked the resolution, and everyone loves the scene in the Emperor's throne room. I love the scene in the Emperor's throne room. It's a great scene. But that should have happened on Coruscant when a fucking planetary siege was happening. And Leia probably should have succumbed to the dark side and Han had to kill her. I don't know. Something epic. Something epic should have been happening, but no, it's for kids. So anyway, and then of course, you know, Star Wars is a valuable thing. It's a perennial favorite. It always sells on home video. I get it. So in the early 90s, there was a very concerted effort to bring Star Wars back into the public consciousness. First, you had Dark Horse Comics, and you had the Thrawn trilogy being released. And we were off to the races because all the people that grew up with Star Wars, like me, suddenly were being given stories in book and comic form. That's what we hoped would be Return of the Jedi. And they were adult serious. Luke was, you know, Luke and Mara Jade and the Skywalker twins and Thrawn, and you take Darth Malgus. Take your pick. We all know what happened. I mean, Star Wars was being re-injected directly into the fan community first. Comic book readers, because comic books have become a huge thing. So Dark Horse gets the license, and Dark Horse did a fucking great job with the Star Wars license. Great job. And then the books. The extended universe, but the fact that Lucasfilm jumped on that and they started to create a continuity. I mean, look, in the 80s, you had Splinter of the Mind's Eye, you had the Lando Calrissian trilogy, and you had like Han Solo at Star's End. You know, you had the Han Solo trilogy, Lando Calrissian, and the Flame Wind of Ocean, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu. And then that was about it. But in the 90s, when they brought Star Wars back, fever pitch, leading up to the Shadows of the Empire, the video they had the whole event. They didn't have a movie, but they had the whole idea. You know, you're creating Prince Xizor or Shizor, and that's a free enterprise joke. But it started to grow again, and Star Wars. The very people like myself that left Star Wars behind, people that were there when Star Wars came out theatrically, we were given things that we wanted, which were more adult-oriented stories set in the Star Wars universe. And the people that were writing these things were extrapolating in ways that you might not have ever seen on film, but they were really cool. Like, it was like, okay, it's like what happened with the best Star Trek fiction. You had passionate writers, people that loved the Star Wars universe, that were now writing things and bringing us things like Christian Gossett designed the double-bladed lightsaber for Dark Horse. I mean, all this stuff came out, and it's like, oh, here's what we wanted Jedi to be, but it was spread out over all these novels, and you got to see what happened with Luke and the new Jedi Order. Take your pick. I don't have to relitigate all that. But you all know. But then we get to 1997 and the Star Wars Special Edition. It's hard to explain this to I mean, I'm going to speak about. I was sorry. It is Robservations after all. I was stunned when I saw the Star Wars Special Edition. Now, it had been 20 years, and by this time, I'd seen Star Wars countless times. If somebody told me that I have watched the first Star Wars 250 times now in my life, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all. When I saw the changes that were made to the Star Wars Special Edition, Jaw was falling off Rontos and Mos Eisley. The whole Jabba the Hutt sequence with Han Solo. I'm like, again, that it was the Return of the Jedi sensibility injected into one of my favorite movies of all time. It was soul crushing because I realized that George Lucas now figured that Star Wars and Empire, an empire which he didn't like in the first place, well, let's make sure the audience knows these are for kids. I'm going to do what I can to make these kids' movies. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see the additions that were made to Star Wars. Again, let's make more continuity ties to the universe. I mean, the funny thing is, when you see, just from a filmmaking perspective, when you see all the shit that's happening when they first roll into Mos Eisley and Luke's land speeder, you don't need to see his identification. There's so much crap in the air. That scene was tension filled in Star Wars. It's just these guys. It's stormtroopers. Are we going to get past these guys? But when you have droids and shit flying around, that whole tension is diminished. Now, nowadays, people are like, what's wrong, Rob? Because most people haven't seen the original Star Wars anymore because it's not available. I mean, it was available, the shitty copies on DVD, but, you can't get it. I mean, everybody who wants it has it, but it's hard to get. Most people haven't seen that, and even the Star Wars Special Edition is going to be almost 30 years old. So you have whole generations of people, kids especially, that have grown up who are now Star Wars fans who never saw the original Star Wars. So, and when you go back and try and watch it, and then of course we get to 1999. There's a movie. The Phantom Menace is a movie that, I'm not going to get into it, but I have an article that I want to read, and it relates back to everything. And it's by I've read articles by this guy before. His name's Cole Haddon. He wrote this book, Psalms for the End of the World, that I quite love. I do highly recommend this book. And he writes a lot for Medium. And I've read a lot of his articles, and he has an article that I want to share with you now. Actually, before I share it, let me see where we're at. I want to make sure that I've been talking for like an hour. I just want to look into this and see if there's anybody who has anything to say. Oh, why, yes, you do. Why did I know that people would have something to say? If you have something to say, of course, super chat and the tip feature. Let's see where we are at here. Wow. Okay. I'll just start. Before I read this article, okay, I'll start. Thomas Bartoli has, how are you, man? Is now a new member of the channel. Brian Erdy, our friend Brian Erdy, says, I've been wrangling with this very issue because I want to love Return of the Jedi. It does so many things well, but when it's bad, it's really bad. Looking forward to your thoughts. Well, you're getting them. Jordan Saylor, is that with an I? Jordan Saylor is a friend of the channel. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Kenneth Colton has been a member for 22 months. And he says, proud to be a member of this channel. It's always a pleasure, Rob. Well, thank you. Shay Marquell says, Rob, you are amazing. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Fist bump to you. And remember, that's because everybody has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. Tom Jr. Jackson says, happy birthday. Thank you, Tom. Paul Allen Bernardo says, hi, Rob. I agree Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back are the best movies of the franchise and influence many filmmakers over the decades and are timeless. They are. Dennis A. Blue-eyed Thing became a member. Thank you. Sinagiri has been a member for 24 months. Major Chai Chai. What does your shirt say? The banner blocks it. Well, you're going to get to read it when I read this article. I'll leave you in suspense. Oh, by the way, this is personal and confidential to Major Chai Chai. This was good. Sorry. Hamilton Cox says, Rob, you are absolutely correct. I've been saying for decades that Star Wars was one fun film, one great film, then all crap from there. The more Lucas as Unbound, the worse it got. Yes. Chris Kors here. Chris Kors sent me a $20 super chat. This whole show, by the way, Chris, if you're still watching, is because of you and Versus. Versus is one of, I think, the best pundit shows on for pundits who put together. It's a really great group of people, and Chris always has great topics. Tony Reyes says, off topic, but did you get a chance to check out Gundam Requiem for Vengeance? I cannot wait to see Gundam. It looks so good. I spend all of my time, if I'm not streaming with people or doing my own shows, I am editing True Noir. And hopefully, if all goes well, I do the final mix tomorrow on True Noir. I don't start it. We're going to finish it. The final mix on True Noir episode 1, the Nitty Raid tomorrow. And on Friday, I do the final mix on a chapter 2, Visiting Hours. So, and then I deliver episode 3 shortly. And hopefully you'll be hearing the full episode soon. Tim O.B. says, I'm sure you know, but even in 77, there were multiple versions of Star Wars on day one if you saw the 70mm stereo or mono, that being dialogue, special effects, and a couple of VFX shots coming at the 11th hour of release. Yeah, that's true. That is true. And, yeah, but, I mean, there minor differences. I mean, I used to catalog them all in my head, and I have certain releases, unofficial releases that have different versions of those very things. Jordan Saylor says, are we forgetting the Slave Leia outfit? I grew up quick after that. Yeah, I mean, look, but that was still done in a kind of in an adolescent oogly way. I mean, hey, I love it. But, hey, now we can't even call her Slave Leia anymore. She's Hutt Slayer Leia. What that says about our civilization, I don't even know. Checkers the Inventor has been a member for 35 months, who says, Rob, you are one of the very few people who can articulate why Star Wars and Empire are far and away the best. It's often a frustrating conversation. Oh, I'm going to get into that. Alana Body, how you doing, Alon? Hope things are good over there. Okay. I'm going to read this article, but I'll read the article first. So if you want to send in super chats, or the tip link is in the description below, we can get into it because this article is really, really interesting. And Major Chai Chai, you will see what my shirt says. You ready? I'm just here to establish an alibi. That's right. I had to get the shirt. I thought it was pretty funny. Uh-oh. Don't want to do that. So, here we go. What really went wrong with the Star Wars prequels? Maybe. This was published 5 hours ago. And again, Cole Haddon, who wrote this book, Psalms for the End of the World, which I highly recommend. You should get it. I have a theory about George Lucas's original far more tragic intentions for the central relationship of his prequels, which could help you learn how to better interrogate the films in general. In case you clicked on this link to hear me rail against the Star Wars prequels, I just want you to know that won't be happening here. Aside from my general disdain for shitting on other people's art in public spaces, I'm of the opinion that George Lucas's sometimes maligned prequels to the original trilogy are quite good, despite their faults. In fact, I've come to believe Lucas eerily predicted the general rise of fascism in the West in the 21st century with these deeply authored films. They each have a bespoke quality to them, as well as depth the original trilogy lacked, that's born from Lucas's own anti-imperialism, colonialism, establishment views. Revenge of the Sith, in particular, ranks among my top 3 favorite films in the Skywalker saga, as we are now expected to call the 3 trilogies. So, what are we doing here today? Good question from the back of the room. Today, we're going to instead theorize with evidence about a dramatic course correction Lucas made after the release of The Phantom Menace. And I'm saying this, why I love this article is because the same course correction was made in the original trilogy too. Even if I'm wrong, and I don't believe I am, this exercise will be useful in helping you learn how to deconstruct films. In doing so, you begin to understand how to write them yourself. To begin, let's consider 3 things. Lucas constructed his 6 Star Wars films in part using mythological tropes popularized by Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey. Many of the tropes and other story elements used in the original trilogy are repeated or echoed. It's like a poem. In the prequels, just check out The Phantom Menace, in which Anakin Skywalker reacts to his call to adventure in the same way his son does in A New Hope. A wise mentor dies at the end of Phantom Menace. A wise mentor dies at the end of A New Hope. Anakin's hand gets cut off in Attack of the Clones. Luke's hand gets cut off in The Empire Strikes Back. The Arthurian love triangle at the center of the prequels. The Arthurian love triangle at the center of the original... Wait, what? In the original trilogy, the Arthurian love triangle established in A New Hope consists of Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and their mutual love interests, Leia Organa. This is before the creepy incestuous stuff blew up the threesome's tension. Meanwhile, The Phantom Menace introduces us to the prequel trilogy's 3 protagonists: the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker, the Warrior, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the Queen, Padme Amidala. Anakin is 9 years old, Obi-Wan is 25, and Padme is 14. Too old for Anakin and too young for Obi-Wan to fall in love with. For now. By the time we reach Attack of the Clones, 10 years have passed. Anakin is now a young man, Obi-Wan is 35, less a father figure than a brother, which he will emphasize in Return of the Jedi, and Padme seems to exist age maturity somewhere between the two. Que misterioso, Padawans. In the King Arthur myth, Arthur is a young man who is called to adventure when he pulls the sword from a stone. You might even say he was chosen by supernatural forces because that's what happens. As a result, he marries Guinevere and forms the Knights of the Round Table with his closest friend and greatest warrior, Lancelot, in charge of it. Problematically, Queen Guinevere isn't as turned on by her Chosen One as she is by the Chosen One's warrior, friend, and brother. Arthur, in turn, crumbles and brings an end to his glory and prosperity of his kingdom. See where I'm going with this? Chosen One, warrior, queen, Arthur, Lancelot, Guinevere, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme. So now ask yourself this. Why would Lucas carefully create an Arthurian love triangle, one that perfectly mirrors the relationship roles of the actual King Arthur myth, if he didn't intend to use them in some way? Because like the original trilogy, which merely apes a familiar triangle of affections, this explosive, ultimately destructive dynamic is far more explicit in the prequels. And now we get to my argument, which I believe makes a lot more sense than the relationships that actually played out on screen in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Lucas didn't originally intend for Anakin to fall to the dark side because he was afraid he was going to lose Padme to childbirth. I agree. I'm confident the original intention was that Anakin would fall in love with Padme, Padme would fall in love with Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan and Padme's betrayal would, as it did with Lancelot and Guinevere, drive the Chosen One to turn to the dark side and bring about the ruination of the Republic. What I'm saying is, Anakin's fall from grace was going to be caused by the noble Obi-Wan's inability to keep it in his pants. Of course, Padme plays a role in this melodrama. It's not like she wasn't as interested in Obi-Wan's lightsaber as he was her, vigorous political positions. Sorry, I couldn't help myself there. In this scenario, Anakin's spiritual fall is light years more dramatic and emotionally gutting as he is, in many ways, a victim of those he loves most. Padme also becomes a tragic character with her own agency rather than just existing as a function of Anakin's fall, and to push out Luke and Leia before dying from a broken heart. Most importantly, it makes Obi-Wan much more interesting going into the original trilogy. So much so, it would completely reframe our understanding of the original trilogy, as his role in them would be secretly one of redemption, from tragic villain to galactic savior. So there you have it, my crazy prequel trilogy theory. I'm not sharing this with you as a piece of fan fiction. I don't want to hear how you wish these were the relationships you actually got in the prequels or other versions you also hope for. I want you as storytellers, wherever you are on your journey, to pause and consider the possibility that I'm right. Ask yourself why Lucas might have abandoned this trajectory, similar to how he also scrapped Jar Jar Binks as a major character, and what you might have gained or lost had he not. Moreover, I want you to consider how interrogating the prequels in this way might help you do similar with other films, breaking down their structural mechanics to understand their character arcs and thematic layers better. In doing so, you will take your first step into a larger world, as Obi-Wan Kenobi once told the son of the Jedi he cuckolded in a parallel Star Wars universe. I want to read that, and you know what? I think he's right. But here's the thing. Do you know why Lucas had to change it? Because Lucas doesn't fuck. He doesn't want these movies to fuck. He's making them for kids. And just like he took the sexual obsession out of Return of the Jedi, he doesn't want sexual obsession to sully what is apparently an infantilized story. And that's the problem. That is the entire problem with Star Wars. Star Wars was bought by a company that makes movies that do not fuck. Disney doesn't fuck. And what's the problem with that is that you're not dealing with you're casting aside so much of the human experience. And I mean, look, Lord of the Rings, that trilogy, it fucks. People in that trilogy fuck. They love each other. They lust after one another. People want to do that. It's part of, and I use it, look, I'm saying this to be funny, but I also use it euphemistically as what you're doing is, and what Lucas was doing, if you had the Arthurian trilogy, the thing is that what does Luke have to go do? Join the Jedi Order. Why? Because there's no fucking. You know, he has to allow its, and in doing so, in letting his obsession in Leia go, he has to become a Jedi to save the galaxy. That's interesting. That's, you know, by making Leia his sister, I mean, come on. Are you kidding me? The funny thing is, I swear to God, I thought when they did the special edition of Empire, they were going to cut out the scene where Leia kisses Luke. Maybe the laugh there was not worth getting rid of, but it's always fascinated me that it's still there. Ask yourself, why is that still there? Why is that still there? I don't know. But at the end of the day, Star Wars was bled of its adult nature by its creator, who felt more comfortable making movies for kids than movies for adults. I mean, and he's a man that clearly watched THX 1138, which is, it's so interesting because, you know, sexual love was liberating in that movie. And of course, everybody wants to get laid in American Graffiti. But it's like Lucas still exists there, uncomfortable with that aspect of the human element. And Star Wars will forever be mired in childhood because it was cut off the knees in Return of the Jedi. It was not allowed to grow. It was like Kirsten Dunst in Interview with a Vampire. Was it Claudia? Is that her name? She could never grow old. And so Star Wars as a franchise, as an IP, and the problem that it has, can never grow up. Can't grow up. And that's kind of a tragedy, really. Because Star Wars and Empire were growing up with me. Star Trek grew up. The MCU has a similar problem because it's owned by Disney. But, and our entire Gen Z has the same problem. Interesting. I mean, it's all, you know, I look at the stories of motion pictures that I loved and they've helped me literally grow up. All of my favorite films are definitely adult-minded movies. But anyway, that's my big diatribe and theory about Star Wars. And it's too bad that Star Wars is where it is, because I don't know if it can... Look, what's really interesting now is you're seeing creators who are trying to inject themselves. And the only person who should ever inject themselves into Star Wars is George Lucas, because it's his creation. But we've seen how creators, through the extended universe books and the comics, we've seen Star Wars done very, very well. But everybody discounts those because they're decanonized and they don't count. So we're forever going to get an Obi-Wan TV series that you have to inject a little 9-year-old Princess Leia into, because you can't deal with what really happened to that man in the Star Wars universe. That's why I love Andor. Andor fucks. It does. It fucks. And I mean that euphemistically and literally and figuratively, all in the same. It is a movie, it is a TV show about adults. And why do so many Star Wars fans think it's boring and reject it? Because Star Wars has been perpetually infantilized. And that's the problem with Star Wars as an IP. And that's when Disney bought it, that was its fate. Star Wars is like Pinocchio. It'll never grow up. It can't grow up. And if it doesn't grow up, it will die. Because there's only so many stories that you can tell. Whether it's about... Look, the Star Wars universe is infinitely interesting. But if there's one thing that tells you the problem of Star Wars, the Book of Boba Fett should have done it. There was an intrinsically adult story about a crime boss. But Disney can't really tell that story. Not really. You can't tell Scarface or King of New York or Goodfellas or whatever. You can't tell a real criminal underworld story and get into the nitty-gritty of what that means when Disney's making it, because they won't allow you to deal with those actual themes. And that's the problem. It's too bad. If we could have seen the Return of the King in the Star Wars franchise, it might have gone on to be an IP that hasn't perpetually been disappointing, at least for the last 25 years. So, Angry Badger, come at me, bro. Tell me what you think. Right down there in the comments. And let's see, there's, I'm sure there's more people that are saying things, or maybe not, I don't know. Let me delve into where you guys are at. Blue Sunrise says Star Wars can still be saved. Favreau brought us Mandalorian. Maybe he can rekindle that magic again with his next film. The Mandalorian suffers from the same problem. The Mandalorian is literally again, it's infantilized Star Wars. It's Star Wars for adolescents. It's cool. We love the universe, but again, it's perpetually for 14-year-olds. We watch it because it's cool, but The Mandalorian had the same problem. Tell me a story about what that character would really be like. And look at what go to what Lucas did. Look at Kurosawa, look at Yojimbo, look at Sanjuro, look at Ron, look at Kagamusha, Throne of Blood, any of those things. God, I want to see something like that. Give it to me again. We're getting a Mandalorian and Grogu movie after the 3rd season of Mandalorian. Who cares? Who cares? It's certainly... does anybody care? I mean, everyone loves Grogu, but why do they love Grogu? Because he's the cute little version of Yoda? I mean, that's literally... And yeah, The Mandalorian's cool because The Mandalorian is the closest thing to a Boba Fett show. It was supposed to be Boba Fett, and they made it The Mandalorian. Oh, don't get me started. It's still not good. It's fine. Whatever. The Elusive for $20 super chat. Thanks, man. The problem with Jedi and all Star Wars after that is Lucas wasn't making Star Wars. He was making The Hidden Fortress with Flash Gordon. Success bound him and later Disney into making more Star making more I think you mean to say Star Wars, making more Star Wars his own desires and creativity be damned. I think that's partially true, but so go back and you could go make Hamlet in the Star Wars universe. There's so many things you could do and it'd be interesting. But you're right. I mean, it's a bummer. RRTNZ says, in my opinion, Return of the Jedi is still great. Despite the ridiculous Ewoks, the swashbuckling rescue of Han, Luke, and Vader scenes are immensely satisfying. Yeah, but that's 2 scenes in the movie. It's the beginning and the end. The swashbuckling scene's great for like 10 minutes. You know, it's literally a side quest. They wrote themselves into that. They had to rescue Han Solo. What does Han Solo have to do? I mean, you have to get him back. But Han Solo, if you took Han Solo out of that movie, it really wouldn't change anything. You know, if they went and rescued him later. The movie's really about the conflict between Vader and Luke. That's what the movie's about. And Luke really doesn't do much. You know, his whole time hanging out, he goes to see Yoda so he can have an exposition dump. But it would have been interesting to see Luke grappling with the fact that, is he a full-fledged Jedi yet? You know, I don't know. 1001 Johnny says, tips, Rob, sorry. Also, if it fucks has grit and moxie, it's mature. Major Chai Chai says, she'll give me an alibi for a price. That's reassuring. I do appreciate that. Darth Plato says, Yoda, there is another. The line must mean something or else it wouldn't be in the movie. I agree that Leia was not the one. So who was the one? Was there another sister? Was Luke supposed to mirror the Dune siblings? Who was the sister? Well, there was a sister, but Luke wasn't supposed to find her. Not in Jedi. It is Luke's sister, but it wasn't supposed to be Leia. So, yeah. 1001 Johnny says, I'm not surprised to keep hearing that Jedi was the biggest cinematic disappointment for some. I'm sure I felt something very similar when Justice League came out in theaters. Oh, me too, bro. But I didn't expect it to be great because of what had happened. Because it didn't feel like at all what I had seen in 2013 and 2016. But I got Zack Snyder's Justice League. Zack Snyder's Justice League is a great vindication, I think. Not perfect, but I do love that. I do love it. I can't complain. 1001 Johnny says, if they took Han out, yeah, nothing would change, but my mom wouldn't be happy. It's true. I don't think anybody's mother would be happy. Yeah. But it's all interesting. I mean, it's all speculation. But the litigating the past, I just find it interesting that the lesson learned is I have seen a dumbing down of the nuances of adulthood and what it means to get older and what it means to live in the real world. And one of the great things about movies as an art form is they do such a great job. Even the best fantasy films, the best horror movies, the best dramas, the best comedies, they always have something to say about the human condition in a mature, multifaceted way. Empire Strikes Back certainly did. And, yeah. I just don't know if Star Wars will ever be relevant to anybody. Yeah, you can watch people go through Ben Johnson asks, could they do a Luke and Mara Jade show or movies? Sure, they could. But the thing was, what you have left is the Star Wars universe. That's what everybody loves now. The stories that Disney is choosing to tell us are like, why couldn't you make a story about Ben Kenobi? There was a Ben Kenobi novel. Why not adapt that? Why did you have to bring back Anakin and retcon Vader and him? Why did you have to put little Princess Leia in there? Why can't you tell me a great story about Ben Kenobi? Why is that so hard? Why does everybody find that such a difficult proposition? Why do you have to tie everything together? Tell us a story about Ben Kenobi and where he's at, how he feels. You know? You don't have to have everything connect to everything else. Why, Mike G asks, why did George turn it toward kids? Why didn't he trust historical mythology? Interesting, figuratively, that young Lucas nearly died in a car crash in which he veered off the road. I think because George Lucas is essentially a nerd at heart. There's a lot of nerds. I know a lot of nerds, and I mean this respectfully in the best way. I don't like the word nerd. That's why I came up with imagination connoisseur. But there's a lot of people I know that, you know, their transition to adulthood was never really completed. And they've carried the nerd with them their whole life. And I think that's part of it. 1001 Johnny says, pardon Rob, I also tipped to ask you if you got to my email. Oh no, I have not gotten your email yet. I really haven't looked. I'm going to get to everybody's email. There's a few things that I have to read for the next show, so I will get there. I know I got something for you. But yeah, I mean, and I think, so Star Wars was bought by a company that by definition, Disney cannot allow Star Wars to grow up. So until Disney decides, I mean, look, it's funny, they give us an MCU movie in Deadpool and Wolverine, and it's just a goof. You know, it's funny, the first Deadpool movie was a great balance of the goof and a serious, it works on many different levels. I don't think that it at all worked in Deadpool and Wolverine as much as I wanted to love it. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'll end this show. This was a fun show, and I'm glad. I want to thank Cole Haddon once again for writing that article, and I want to thank the Angry Badger and Chris Gore for instilling in me the desire to do a Star Wars stream. I didn't know how to even do one. I hadn't thought about Star Wars in a while until Angry Badger got me off on this track going, what is wrong? What happened to me and what happened to Star Wars, and how can I reconcile it all? So I want to thank them. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. I want to thank all of you who generously support this channel via super chats and tips. And look out for True Noir. Get ready to get it wherever you get podcasts from. We need it to make a splash and do some business. I hope you like it. If you like intricate detective historical mystery fiction, it's for you. I think you're going to like it. And other than that, tomorrow's Halloween. By the way, congratulations to the Los Angeles Dodgers for winning the World Series in Game 5. I know there's a lot of pissed off people in New York, but so anyway, I will talk to you all later. I'm going to go back to editing. I get to spend the next couple hours with Katie Sackhoff. And I mean that literally. Like, it's just her voice. But it's still Katie Sackhoff, and I did direct her to say what she said, so good on me. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everybody, happy Halloween. Silver Shamrock. Do, 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 do.